All right, we're going to look at the development of the ear structure today. The early embryo, you recall, the head kind of bends over during development of the brain. We have this folded over appearance. Right in here is where you have your first visceral arch, the maxillary and mandibular portions of your first visceral arch. Second visceral arch right here. It's between that first and second visceral arch right in here where you have the development of what are called auditory hillocks that help form some of your external ear, that ear flap out there. We call the auricle or the pinna of the ear develops from right there. On the inside of the pharynx, as the pharynx develops, you'll recall that we have the formation of the pharyngeal pouches inside the pharynx, and it's that first pharyngeal pouch that forms a connection of the eustachian tube to the middle ear space. So those things are happening down in here. Adjacent to the brain, we had the formation of some placodes. Remember, there was a nasal placode out here toward the front that ends up inside the eventual nasal cavity, forms the olfactory epithelium. There's a fifth cranial nerve ganglion. There's a seventh cranial nerve ganglion. The vestibulocochlear portion that comes from a placode is in here. Then the ninth and the 10th placode. So we have this arrangement of neuroplacodes going back through here. And we know the eighth cranial nerve placode becomes the vestibulocochlear component of the hearing and equilibrium apparatus there. In addition to those things, we have a couple of vesicles going on here. We've already talked about the eye, and this is the lens vesicle right up here. This back here is the otic, O-T-I-C, vesicle. The otic vesicle. And what we do next, we're going to be looking at what's going on with the otic vesicle and its adjacent eighth cranial nerve or vestibulocochlear nerve ganglion. There. So in the formation of the otic vesicle, we see this same progression that we saw with the formation of the lens vesicle. The initial thickening, it's induced by adjacent tissues. That thickening forms an invagination, an in-pocketing of the tissue of the epidermis that's covering the outside of the embryo. That ectodermal layer comes in, and then that structure separates off from the overlying ectoderm here to form an isolated otic vesicle beneath the epidermis. We're going to want to turn our attention next to what happens to this otic placode as we develop the inner ear apparatus. We kind of know where the outer ear and or middle ear structures have their origins from the pharyngeal cleft and pharyngeal pouch structures, and we know already that the ganglion comes from a placode, the eighth cranial nerve, and migrated into here. So there's our vestibulocochlear nerve number 8 right there, and then this will be the otic vesicle. Both of those had their origins from the surface ectoderm and moved in underneath here. And of course this is the brain right here. So between the brain and the outer ectoderm we have the ganglion. For the ear we have the otic vesicle that will form most of the inner ear structure. Now that otic vesicle, as it begins to grow and change, one of the first things that we'll see come off of that little bubble of the otic vesicle is what's called an endolymphatic duct. Eventually that endolymphatic duct will end up connected to part of the semicircular canals in the way the inner ear develops. Off the other end, we have the beginning of the cochlear duct. So still have this main body of the aortic vesicle, an endolymphatic duct above, and a beginning extension down here that will become the cochlear duct. We probably just should call that the cochlear end of the aortic vesicle at this point. But anyway, there's the beginning of what will be the cochlear duct down here. Next, it's rather amazing how this, what was just a bubble that came off of the ectoderm and underneath the surface, eventually starts to change shape to become our whole inner ear apparatus, and we begin to see in this case the beginnings of our semicircular canals. So we see 3 semicircular canals starting to form here just by kind of pinching away or just kind of reshaping that end of the aortic vesicle. So these are our semicircular canals. Here, and this area here will become the vestibular portion. Or simply vestibule will be fine there. And then of course we have the beginning of our cochlear duct down here. There are still connections to our 8th cranial nerve ganglion. They're going to become more profound as we develop this, but somewhere in this region over here, we'd have our 8th cranial nerve ganglion, and it will have nerve fibers that reach out here and make association with the vestibular portion and other fibers that make contact down here with the cochlear duct portion. Here we have kind of the final stage before we form the complete mature inner ear apparatus. We now have 3 semicircular canals developed that are hollowed out in the middle to make a nice ring for each semicircular canal. The vestibular portion of our inner ear apparatus is now divided into 2 chambers. They're connected right here. But this one right here is referred to as the utricle. In some books referred to as a utriculus. And this one down here is the saccule. And like I said in other textbooks, it's called the sacculus. Saccule or sacculus, utricle or utriculus. Those are the vestibular components in there. We still have our cochlear duct down here. And we have our 3 semicircular canals. This one is considered to be lateral, this one posterior, that one superior. And here there's still a remnant, a little bit of our endolymphatic duct. And then, like I said, our 3 semicircular canals. Now, where this forms, it will eventually be surrounded by bone. And as the bone coalesces around this, we're going to get an outer chamber. And let's pick a good color for outer chamber. We'll make it black. So there's an outer chamber that surrounds this portion, an outer chamber that goes around each of the semicircular canals. And then an outer chamber that goes around the cochlear duct. Something like this. So it's completely encased in this outer material, outer bony material. So within that, we have this first chamber between the bone and the endolymph space there, and that is filled with what we call perilymph, P-E-R-I-L-Y-M-P-H. perilymph, and of course the inner space we've already mentioned is filled with endolymph fluid. Perilymph fluid versus endolymph fluid. They're slightly different in their consistency, and the chambers are divided by tissues throughout. So the inner chamber is derived from that otic vesicle. The outer chamber is the bone that forms around that vesicle as it takes its final shape within the head. Semicircular canals are responsible for helping you detect movement of your head, movement of your body, directional changes. So we call that dynamic equilibrium because we detect changes in position. In the utricle and the saccule is where you find special organs for detecting your position with respect to gravity, the pull of gravity. We call these little structures macule organs. Macule organs, so they're in purple. I've indicated the position for those little macule organs. It just means spot, is what macule means. So little spots where we have little receptors to detect gravity, macule organs. Inside the base of your semicircular canals, we have special structures that help detect the motion at the base of each. Each of these is swollen, and I'm trying to look at a good place to draw that. So this swollen portion at the base right here, referred to as an ampulla. And inside that ampulla you have a small structure that helps you detect the movement. It kind of goes back and forth depending on which way the fluid moves in that tubule right there to detect movement in all three different directions. Your lateral, your posterior, and your superior semicircular canals in there. It's down here in the cochlear duct that we detect sound. So all of our hearing is transduced down through here. On the wall of the vestibular portion, on the wall of the outer part, the perilymph part, there is what's called the oval window where the middle ear bones connect and transduce the sound and transmit that sound into the fluid that surrounds the cochlear duct. And that sound wave passes through here all the way around and then is reflected back the other way. Somehow I didn't draw that quite right. Here we go. So it comes in here and then it circulates back out in the other direction. And somewhere over here there's what's called a round window. So there's our oval window. Receives vibrations from the stapes, the middle ear bones, transmit the signal there, and then down here there's a round window. A membrane that allows the vibration of the fluid without being confined or impeded by a closed space. Gives a little place for that vibration to give as it passes through here. The actual sense is present inside the cochlear duct, and that'll be a matter for another video. This is how your inner ear apparatus takes shape. We've already talked about where the outer ear and the middle ear spaces come from, so there's that makes up all of the structures associated with hearing.